Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and professional growth and opportunity across America. This week on Ameritocracy, I'm joined by Redhorse CEO Dr. John Zangardi. John is a U.S. Navy veteran and a Washington, D.C. technology leader that served as the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security. He has been a great mentor, and we had previously published an article together on the federal government's use of the Technology Modernization Fund. We discussed our shared experiences serving at DHS and evaluated the differences in organizational structure and the ease of implementing technology at DHS compared to the Department of Defense. John and I also talked about the potential of artificial intelligence in government operations and maintenance. We ended with our thoughts on the consolidation of AI responsibilities in federal departments to fall under the Chief Information Officer to avoid bureaucratic delays and help for faster technology modernization. I hope you enjoy. Good afternoon, John. How you doing?
Hey, good afternoon, Troy. Glad to be here.
Yeah, my
on
gosh.
A nice hot day in D.C.
Another hot day in D.C. I was coming in here and we were talking off mic. It's got to be over 100 degrees out there.
Well, it's truly the swamp, isn't it? It's 100
Yeah.
degrees and 100% humidity. It's the swamp.
God. Yeah. So, hey, you and I, the last time I think we got together was during the end of the pandemic, right?
Correct.
Up in your office. You got a beautiful office at Redhorse and you're overlooking the Potomac.
It is a fantastic view. In fact, corporately, on the 4th of July, I opened up the office to the employees so we could sit there in air-conditioned comfort and watch the fireworks from the 12th floor, which is a fantastic view.
Yeah.
And, you know, since it is D.C., air conditioning is great.
Yeah. For the audience, Dr. John Zangardi, I like to call you in formal circles, is the CEO of Redhorse. We worked at DHS for a period of time,
Correct.
probably the highlight of both of our careers. And we also share similarity in our background with being in the U.S. Navy. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, too. And you're right. DHS was what I thought was the highlight of my career in government.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. So within DC, I'm obviously at IBM, and so I do a lot of stuff in the industry on speaking circuit and getting out there and talking about different things around supply chain and finance. And every time I go somewhere, you're there. So you're very important voice here in DC, and I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to get you on the show to talk about a couple of things. So appreciate you coming.
I appreciate the compliment. It's very generous.
Yeah, well, it's the truth. It was interesting, just as a side, and we'll talk a little bit about our time at DHS, but I remember getting to DHS and Dr. Zangardi, as you were known, by the time I got in there, you had left quite a mark there. And so I think I could definitely see as I got to know DC a little bit better, your reputation. And with that, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about your background, kind of, basically your start in Pennsylvania and to your current day here, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, I wouldn't mind at all. So I'm from Scranton. Scranton is it's a wonderful city to be from. And I grew up there, blue collar background, lower middle class. A lot of my family worked in coal mines. The best way to describe it is my mom's first dad died of black lung. Her stepdad died of black lung. For those of you who aren't familiar, black lung is what happens to an individual who spends a lot of time in the mines inhaling the coal dust. It's like asthma. So, that's the background I'm from, that sort of hardworking, salt of the earth sort of place. And, as I grew up in Scranton, it's like, if you're a kid with ambition, but you come from a blue collar background, you're sort of a bit adrift as you're trying to figure things out. But it became clear to me that the opportunities to see the world and grow were not in Scranton. So I realized that as I was off at college, because your world starts opening up in college and you see different opportunities. Majoring in accounting, and I did a couple internships. Troy, I was like, I know you're a CFO. It's not exactly exciting stuff.
It depends on how you look at it, John.
Yeah, true. Beauty is in the eye of
All
the
good people start in finance is what I say, and it sounds like you just proved that, but yeah.
And I will come back to finance later on. So,
Okay.
you remember the movie Officer and a Gentleman?
Yes.
The Navy had this thing at the time called Aviation Officer Candidate School, and went off and did that with the Marine drill instructors. And yes, it was a lot of fun. My class started with 83 people. We graduated 18, which tells you a little bit about how really challenging it is. But it was a great experience. Went to flight school. Ended up flying P3s. And I did a career in the Navy, 25 years flying P3s. And it was fantastic. And for my shore duty, I was in finance, Troy.
I love it.
And I became, after I retired, because my wife said no more,
Mm-hmm.
and I went home a captain. The Navy asked me to come back as a senior executive, and I did. And the task was to go into the N6, where networks and information systems aren't fix the budget. Finance again.
Can I ask you a question? When you were doing your P3 work, I forgot about that. You and I talked about this before. So P3s within the Navy, a big part of their mission is sonar type activities, going out and monitoring areas. I was in sonar when I was in the submarines, and so there was kind of three different classifications. Being in the Navy, you could be a sonar person under the water in the Navy. On submarines, you could be on the surface ship, or you could be doing it from a P3. And I always wished that I would have picked the P3. It seemed like it would have been a really great assignment.
We would have loved to have you.
A lot better than spending 2 or 3 months under the water.
Well, when the flight was over, I was on land, and there was this thing called a bar.
Yeah. Did you ever do time in Hawaii?
Yep. My first tour was in Hawaii, VP6, the Blue Sharks.
Oh, okay.
Squadron was decommissioned back in the 90s. By the way, they no longer fly P3s. They're flying something called the P8. It's a derivative of the 737. Mm. It's a beautiful aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
P3s were a great aircraft for the time, but like anything, you got to move on.
So after you got done, like you said, you came back to work really at the Pentagon, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So talk about that transition as you kind of moved into being out really kind of what we would call the fleet and serving out in the field and then coming back into the Pentagon. Sure.
So after command, so I commanded a squadron in Brunswick, Maine, VP-26, the Tridents. Wonderful squadron. We did deployments to Sigonella. And we spent a lot of time flying over to former Yugoslavia and looking at the terrorist camp in Lebanon and all pre-9/11 stuff. So an interesting mission, because the mission of P3s, while it was still anti-submarine warfare, it had transitioned to ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And they put sophisticated cameras and inverse synthetic aperture radars on the P3, so we were able to do other missions. So it became a true multi-mission aircraft. So I ended up in the Navy's bullpen, and the Navy's bullpen, as you might appreciate, is where the Navy puts together its budget, more finance. From there, I rolled up to the resource sponsor for all of aviation, which is now known as N98, and I was building their budget. Again, finance, Troy.
I'm telling you, John, you can't get away from it.
Can't get that stink off. But it was at that time where I told the Navy, I said, please don't select me for major command, and I put in what we call a don't pick me letter. Mm-hmm. And I made a decision to get out because my wife and I were going to start a family and do something different. And from being around the military, you're moving every 2 years. It's a challenging life. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate what military families do, moving every 2 or 3 years, the deployments, everything, while raising a family. It's an amazing sacrifice these people make to our country that I don't think gets fully recognized. I mean, to go on a deployment in the Navy for 6 months, or to be deployed to Iraq or wherever for a period of time and not see your kids, that's a big deal. And I do appreciate all the service people who've done that. So the Navy said, hey, why don't you come down and work in legislative affairs. So I did a couple of years work in leg affairs, and it was from there that I transitioned over to the SES thing. So uniform one day, I guess suit and tie another day. That's a big transition from wearing, khakis to wearing what you have on.
Yeah, I would imagine too, being at the power base, I've been in the Pentagon a lot. Even with DHS, we would do a lot of joint stuff with the military. And because we had the Coast Guard at DHS, we would have an opportunity to work together. But there's something just very, I don't want to sound corny, but magical and historic about being in that building, and the significance and the heaviness of it. It had to be just quite an honor to work there.
So you're right. And the best way to capture it is if you've walked down the Joint Chiefs hallway, just walking down there and looking at all the, I guess, memorabilia that's encased, or going up to what we call the third deck, where, the service, the Secretary of Defense is, and the pictures of all the former secretaries are walking through the Navy hallway, where all the pictures of, or portraits of all the former Navy secretaries. There's a certain augustness to the whole building that's it's just a remarkable place to serve, because you're at the center of where the action is in terms of where the future of our Defense Department is.
At some point while you're in the Navy, around 2015-16, as a civilian, you eventually make a move over to DHS, from what I'm aware of, in about 2017. Talk about your transition from the Navy into DHS.
Well, my transition first took me to DOD, where I went up to be the principal deputy, DOD CIO. And then, there was a change of the administration. Then there was a need for a CIO over at DHS. And that's how I went over there. So I was like, hey, go over there and help them improve their network, and do the things that you're used to doing in DOD and Navy. Because if you look at my background, I've been around networks, procured networks, ran networks. It was great. But the thing that I learned that was most valuable at DHS, and before I go there, let me say that I had never worked with law enforcement before, and I have to say that they are some of the most remarkable people I've ever worked with, and it was a joy to be there and to learn that perspective, because it is different than what I was used to. Military guys and law enforcement guys, we're all about mission. And I didn't understand that before I went there, but they're about mission. But here's the important thing. The big lesson I took away from DHS is how the Department of Defense organizes around the CIO function needs to be improved. And the model that DHS and other federal civilian agencies use is a direct direction. So if you look at the DHS CIO position, I owned operations for the HQ. I had money. I had policy. I had security. The only thing I really didn't have was contracting. That's not the case in DOD or Navy. So your ability to move more quickly and do things, there isn't a huge bureaucratic burden on you. Truly there is if you're making a major acquisition, but to shift your network from one version of Microsoft to another, it's much easier. And I know that for a fact because I've operated across a lot. Now, to be fair, the scale in DOD is different. It's a huge scale. The scale in DHS is less. That makes it easier too. But just that organizational thing, and while I was in Navy as the CIO, and it's different now than it was when I was there, I would have to work through 5 or 6 3-star staffs to do anything. Think about that.
Yeah. And I think that's, what I notice now being on the contracting side, working at IBM versus at DHS, definitely we had a lot more ability to really quickly react. And, whether it was, putting stuff, temporary facilities on the border, whether it was doing anything that we needed to do, we would, get some direction from the secretary or from the White House. We'd check with the OMB, and next thing you know, we're in full mode.
Exactly.
And the chief procurement officer at that time was Soraya Carrillo. She was really, really effective from my experience in dealing with procurement professionals. And so it was really kind of the CIO, the CFO, and this chief procurement officer were a triad that could get just about anything done.
Right. So to be fair, Soraya did a great job while she was there. And she really helped us, to your point, execute things because we couldn't do it without contracting, right?
That's right.
And to be fair, while there's a lot of great skill sets in government, if it wasn't for contractors, things wouldn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. When I came in, I was asked to go be the chief financial officer because they were having large scale finance systems implementation issues, Coast Guard issues with shipbuilding. So my Boeing experience and my Navy experience kind of came into play. But it was, when you go in there, you're drinking through a fire hose. There's a lot to kind of internalize and try and get on top of. But we both did that, but it was interesting as I did stay to the end. There was a lot of people that kind of come and gone, and not just in DHS. You meet people in all the different departments. And I was just kind of curious, when you get to the point where you're at with almost 40 years of experience at that time, what was the rationale for you leaving? Because I only asked you because you left before I got there.
Well, you actually made my point. At some point in time, you're done. And I think I was at nearly 40 years of combined service, which is a very long time. And I personally felt that if I don't get out to industry now, it'll never happen and I'll never have that experience. So I think after serving 40 years, I've done more than the average bear. And,
I guess so.
I've done more than the average bear. So I thought, it's time to try something new. And it has been a very interesting experience, and I'm glad I did it. Now, I think you'll understand this. There is something in industry that's wonderful. They're great people, and I love it. But the one thing we miss, and I know you know what it is mission. And so still to this day, I do miss mission, but I am so happy that I made this transition and did it when I did so I can experience this because it is, it's something important. And also my kids are, they're still teenagers, both of them. Doing this was also a great example to show them because all they saw from me was military and government service. And while that's great and they understand the service piece, now I'm able to talk to them about industry and my experiences in growing a company. And both of them have interests in being entrepreneurs, something that I, as a kid from Scranton, never thought about, but they are. And so it's been nice to be able to talk to them about this experience that is so different than my past experiences.
So what I want to do a little bit, John, is pivot. A big part of the show is to talk about people, either to help give models that people can follow through their career. The one part of your career that I think is really interesting right there at that point where you're at DHS, you've done your 40 years, is the pivot you start to make to industry. And I would like to talk a little bit about that. As you started to make that pivot, you ended up at Redhorse, but you also pivoted into, your experience of the federal government, your experience of technology becomes very valuable. You also served on 4 or 5 boards. I'm kind of interested in that. I kind of want to talk a little bit about, what was your mindset as you decide now you're going to make the move over? At Redhorse, you definitely, as the CEO, you have a great team there. Talk about your pivot point in your mind as you're starting to face industry and try to make that next step from a transition.
Sure. So my wife likes to think of me as crazy because I want to do everything. And so getting out, I just felt this need to do everything I possibly could. So I wanted to run a company. I wanted to grow a company, but I also wanted to be part of these other things where as an advisor to a startup, the opportunity to help them think through the problem, whether it's as an advisor to a company like Duality, which is doing homomorphic encryption, which is really cool technology, or on the board of directors for a company like Symmetrica, which is doing radiation detection, which plays to the work that DHS does, to be able to advise them or to even be on a publicly traded company and begin to understand the concerns that the SEC imposes on you, dealing with investors. I chair a comp committee. Coming from government and eventually chairing a comp committee, what a learning experience. So, my desire to be involved in so many things really prompted that. And what was really nice, fortunate, blessed in my case is that people asked me, right? So while it's very hard to get onto boards, and it is an honor that people ask you to be on boards and to participate at that level of a company and help provide the governance that gets them in the right direction or keeps them in the right direction. So it's been a great experience, whether as an advisor or as a full board member. Loved it.
I get a lot of questions with the types of activities I do, very similar to you. I'm an executive of a Fortune 500 company. I own companies outside of this, and I also am on boards, and I have this podcast. And so a lot of times I think people don't know how to react to, hey, why don't you just focus on one thing? And and sometimes when I've had some great leaders that I work for that are unbelievable, and that model works. There's something to be said. But I think, for me personally, I want so much out of life. Like you said, different experiences, and I feel like I can do all those things. But the balance part of, like, when people are listening to this show and they hear what you're doing, and I would recommend anybody do just a little bit of research on you, and they'll see in full force. I bet you do get that same sort of question, which is like, you're running a very successful company. You're doing all this advisement work in the boards. I see you do a lot of eminence work and panels and stuff. How do you find the balance for that? And without your wife calling you crazy, what any other specific example or help that you could give the audience from your perspective?
So Troy, first off, the fact that you do all of that is what makes you, right? All those different pieces, all those different interests, I think, build a better executive. And what you can bring to your experiences at your Fortune 500 company is, hey, what you've garnered from meeting interesting people, doing these podcasts, talking to other boards. So you learn a lot and you bring it to you. I think it makes you well-rounded. And as long as I'm on this subject, I think reading is really important. I think General Mattis, I forget how many books he read, but it's some phenomenal number of books. But you get a sense when you talk to a person that they've lived a full life, have a lot of experiences, and therefore have the ability to offer more. So I think the fact that you and I both do a lot of different things and they're varied helps you bring more to the game.
Mm-hmm. Well, talk to me now about Redhorse, and talk to me about what you guys are doing, because you're really moving the needle. And I know we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, because that's something that I've been seeing your company be involved with, but I've actually seen you talking a lot about too lately.
So, I joined Redhorse first as the president. And the owner, a gentleman named David Inman, founded it in 2008, built a great company. And part of joining it was we were going to begin to look at selling the company. And we eventually did. Blue Delta Capital Partners, if they're online, they're a great venture capitalist to be associated with. They came in and made an investment, and I'm proud to be affiliated with them. And one of my mentors, and for all of your people, viewers or listeners, it's always important to have a mentor or mentors. Rennie DiPentima has been mentoring me for 20 years, and I always kid with him. You haven't been that successful doing it, have you?
Depends on the frame of reference. I'm sure they are really proud of what they've been able to do. But
he's done great. But having people like that at the company or the venture capitalists who have faith in you, and they wanted me to be the CEO and take this company to the next level and focus it more on where it was headed. Data analytics, which encompasses artificial intelligence, machine learning, DevSecOps. We want to move more into the cloud. And the customers we were with, the national security side, the law enforcement side, the IC or intelligence community is really where they wanted us to focus it. And so when you take over a company and you have to make changes, and my company is not as big as yours, you probably won't even notice us as we go by. When you make changes, it has an impact. So I changed out an entire leadership team. I revamped the strategy. I brought in a lot of talent from a company known as Novetta, which was bought by Accenture Federal Systems. We are working very closely to their strategy. And I think it has a lot of resonance still today, where you're focused on DevSecOps, cloud, national security in those market spaces, because in the work in those market spaces and in those solution sets are what will move the needle for government. So whether you're looking at something like predictive maintenance or cyber analytics for some of the work we do with the FBI, whether it's reverse engineering, whatever it is on that technical side, that's where the government needs to be moving. That's where they can leverage the technologies and the solutions that we in industry can bring. So Redhorse has, over the last couple of years, made one acquisition. We bought a company called Allied Associates International, and we added to our technical profile a lot of the tools and solutions they use at the FBI. It opened up the UK market to us, which I think is really cool. We're beginning to look at our next acquisitions that would help us potentially move into the three-letter agency space a little bit more fully. We have a little presence there right now, and we've done some very interesting work with knowledge graphs, if you're familiar with that technology. So we work very closely with Hume, Neo4j, and other companies to bring that ability for an intelligence community analyst or just an analyst to be able to look more deeply at the data and obtain from it its meaning that they can bring to mission and help make better decisions.
Yeah. No, I got a question. Recently, you had done an article, and I think you actually did a speech with us too, but it was by the BINS Insights, or the executive group that focuses in
Business Executives for National Security.
There you go. And I was really impressed that the paper, talked a lot about the adopting Gen AI and the different pathways, and it was a little bit of a direct focus, and I won't say a direct hit, but it was definitely a direct focus on DoD and potentially some of the AI activity that goes on there. Talk a little bit about the article, if people, and like I said, I'll post it, people can kind of take a look at it.
Yeah. So the article is really about driving artificial intelligence and the advantages that it brings into the federal government. And not part of the article, but I think worth mentioning here is we hear a lot about artificial intelligence today. A lot of the times what's talked about as artificial intelligence really isn't artificial intelligence, but putting that aside, it is the next wave, and it is what can bring a lot of benefit to the government. The government has more data than I think anything else on the planet, right? And that data has a lot of information, a lot of help it can bring to our making of decisions to support the mission. But the move to artificial intelligence is just like an on-off switch that you can move to in one day. And we talked a little bit about this before we started. I've been around long enough to remember other technologies that, well, industry's like, hey, you got to buy this stuff. We're ready to get it. And think back 15 years, cloud. I was in the Navy at that time. We had no idea what the cloud was. We didn't know what it meant. We didn't know how many applications we had. We had never rationalized them, which, by the way, is a huge effort and one fraught with a lot of emotions because no one wants to give up any of their applications, but you need to. We didn't even know how many data centers we had. We had 120 at the time. Wow. So, right, you think about all that and the money that's being spent. So we first had to sort through applications. We had to sort through our data centers to reduce those. And then we, as a government, as a DoD, we had to sort through, well, what is the security that should be present in the cloud? Because after all, if I'm going to put personally identifiable information, or PII, or HIPAA, healthcare information, into a cloud, well, don't I want it to be secure? And I think industry and government work together very closely to come up with some solutions. FedRAMP was a good first step. It needs a lot of improvement. It's very bureaucratic, but government's moving very smartly to the cloud right now, whether it's Microsoft's Office 365 or other things. It took us a while to get there. I think artificial intelligence is moving at a faster pace, but there's still concerns. Is the AI ethical? Is it responsible? Have we dealt with data poisoning? Have we dealt with all of these other issues that come up with? And what you'll see, same thing with the cloud, you'll have the tension between those who want to go fast and take advantage and the CISOs who are responsible for providing cybersecurity. I was at RSA this year, and one of the interesting things, and RSA is the big cybersecurity conference in San Francisco, 25,000 attendees. SEC is thinking about putting rules in place that would make CISOs personally liable similar to CFOs and corporations. And so when you start thinking through the implications of the cybersecurity risks inherent in artificial intelligence, and if you have personal liability, that might slow you down a little bit, wouldn't it? So I think while that's not a governmental concern, that's also a function in how quickly it can be absorbed. And I personally think you'll see things go faster, and the generative AI space and the predictive maintenance space is where very interesting things can be done to help out government.
Let me ask you this. So two things I kind of want to hit on, and maybe I'll package them up for you. So, September 2023, the executive order put out by President Biden for AI. I've said this in a couple of my other shows. It's a thing I'm kind of focused on, which was it provided a framework. But for the things that you talked about, can I trust it? Is it safe? Does it wander? Is it reliable? All good questions. But, I think the aftermath of my experience across government right now is that it is stifling innovation a bit. So there's that. Then you and I come at AI from the field. Like, you were in P3s, you understand what it means to maintain an aircraft. I definitely started in, submarines, moved into running logistics business, for really the Air Force C-17s when I was at Boeing. So you see this technology that you can now apply to predictive maintenance, and we've got like real functional knowledge of how it is when you used to have to pull maintenance cards and pull them out of and actually do all this by hand. And then really stuff might have got written on it, but it was never reevaluated. There was never trending done. And then, if that card came up another quarter or two and it said replace this $30,000 thing, the card said it, so I got to do it.
Correct.
So the next thing you know is it creates a maintenance regime that is really kind of hard to overcome. And just a little bit more context. So one of the jobs that I've done at IBM was for NAVFAC, or Naval Facilities Organization, and they have an ability to maintain buildings, and so a lot of the information they do there is manual too, and trying to maintain controlled surfaces, air conditioning, power plants, et cetera. And again, not as manual as it was back in the day, but still pretty manual. Versus like when I think about the power of predictive maintenance, when AI, where if you were able to collect information from the pieces of equipment, either through IT, IoT, et cetera, or, the equipment a lot of times is built in with sensors, being able to pull it up, bring in that data. Then the problem was there was so much data they didn't know what to do with. Now you use AI to apply to the data, and you then start to then model trends. You can see when things potentially on the verge of failure, when it fails. Next thing you know is that you really could take a significant chunk out of the maintenance, not only in the Department of Defense, but even in FedCiv and the law enforcement sides, FBI, Homeland Security. So one of the things like in, some of the areas that you've been talking about as potential areas of opportunity in predictive maintenance. I was just wondering, from your role, DOD, your role as CIO of DHS, and then juxtapose that against this AI executive order that really seems to have us stepping backwards. I wonder, on the predictive maintenance side, is that safe? Is that an area that we can go into from your perspective, or is this one that it's wise that we kind of hold back? It seems to me it's not. We should be going all in. So
I agree with you. Let me put it in simpler terms. So when you think about the least risky areas to utilize generative AI or any form of AI, well, I would say things like FOIA, maybe some things in the CFO world, predictive maintenance. What would be the most risky areas? Well, anything dealing with personal information, anything in your human relations department, I would be immediately going, maybe not. But I think when you talk about those discrete activities, I'd feel much more comfortable going after that, particularly when you look at predictive maintenance. I mean, we have the information, we have the data, it's known. It's a treasure trove that could improve. So Troy, I look at it like this, and I'm going to do two examples here. And Redhorse is very involved in predictive maintenance, and we're moving into the generative AI space. But from a personal point of view, I mentioned I was a commanding officer of VP 26, flew P3s, and that. So I'm going back to 2002, which dates me, but still relevant. The age of my aircraft was almost 28 years old across my 9 aircraft. That's old. when you think about it. And the P3 in and of itself is, old technology. It's really based upon a 1950s design called the Lockheed Electra, right? So it is a very old design. It's a venerable aircraft, and it was a pleasure to fly it, but it is old. But as a CEO, and you're thinking about, well, I want to deploy an aircraft. Well, you sit down with your maintenance officer, really your maintenance chief, and you go, hey, what's the most reliable bird? And he would go, he had a little more experience than that because they're dealing with it. That's how you picked it, right? It wasn't scientific. It was based upon human input, which is great. I think there's the need for human in the chain with AI is absolutely critical. But imagine if I had predictive maintenance and I knew that if I send this aircraft, on the third day it's there, that engine's going to fail. But if I change the part today, before I deploy it, I won't have that problem there. Right there, it's incredible. So first off, you're able to accomplish mission. You've probably saved money because wherever you've deaded that aircraft, they probably don't have maintenance support. So you have to fly everything in and the maintainers to fix it. So if you really think that through, so in terms of savings, but really more importantly, in terms of mission, the improvement is incredible. But I want to pick up on the generative AI piece because I think there's a generative AI piece to all of this. So when you're on an aircraft, you're doing a pre-flight and there's a problem, you call it maintenance, and maintenance comes out. But imagine if maintenance came out, they weren't just coming with the book that they could flip through and look up things, that they had a computer screen where they can type in, the problem seems to be this. And because you're utilizing generative AI and those maintenance books are data that can be, it can come back and say, this is what you should do. It would sound more professional than that.
No, I'm going to write that prompt down. No.
Yeah, this is what you should do. Right. But imagine the speed at which you could get to done. Because I remember you'd go out and you pre-flight a plane, the maintainer would come out, he's got to troubleshoot it, and the first thing they always do is, well, let's cycle it from on to off and back on to again. In fact, you got to go through all these, but if the book was in the computer and you could spit it out, imagine the advantages to our government.
The probably the last part on the predictive maintenance that I see is right now there is a shortage of people. It's very hard to, hiring is definitely I've looked at from a, Army, Navy, when you look at the Army depot process, you see depots that aren't fully staffed up, to be able to maintain their warfighters and the different components and the way that they are set up. The Navy shipyard, same thing. Is that I think predictive maintenance also doesn't have you do maintenance just to do it. So it's smart maintenance. And because of that, you potentially could do what you're doing with the complement of people that you have and not always be behind on things that really aren't important, but it looks like you have a significant maintenance backlog. And I think that that backlog, that debt that they covered, and I think it would make it safer in the long run because I think you would be focused on the things that you could actually, get before it actually fails.
So we were not at war when I had my squadron, but the number one issue that I focused my squadron on was safety. Right? I mean, you're not at war, so anything you could do to make sure that the servicemen and servicewomen are safe is truly important. And, if generative AI or predictive maintenance can get you there and ensure that, it's a big win. But let's flip it a little bit. We talked about Soraya. Soraya was great. They ran a wonderful shop on contracting at DHS, but we both know from our industry experience that contracting officers, what we know as 1102s, there's a shortage. So how can we use artificial intelligence to help with that? Right? I would never suggest that artificial intelligence should be the source selection team. But what can artificial intelligence do to speed up the process so government can bring in innovative things more quickly, execute more quickly? So we need to be looking at those avenues also to bring benefit to the government because because we serve there, we want government to be innovative. I think we both want government to be smaller too. And if we could do more with less, that's a win.
So as we get kind of ready to wrap up a little bit, I guess one of the questions I had is, we when we look at AI and we're looking at some of the potential applications, practical applications, today we picked predictive maintenance. Another feedback that that I get when I talk to different people in industry is that, who's leading AI across government? And, maybe because we both serve there, we look at DHS, they've established, a chief AI officer in Eric Heisen doing a great job, but they did that as the nexus of his day job, which was CIO. And I guess when I look across government, I don't see that clearly. And then if you were to put in kind of on top of that, the White House and OMB and their perspective, and, we talked about the executive orders. So if you see this framework of governance for AI kind of across government, it seems like there's a lot of governance work ahead. And it was just kind of wanted to get your take with 40 years of government experience out there and seeing, hey, you live through the cloud. I'm just going to use your example that you gave earlier, and you've watched that manifest itself. It was probably painful sometimes and exciting in others. Any suggestions or from your perspective of how government would go forward with trying to establish the governance in a way to actually move us out from this framework, paralysis that feels like we're in?
It's a good way of putting it. First off, Eric's doing a great job. Eric Heisen at DHS is the CIO and Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer. He's really moving things forward. But I also think if I were to recommend to government how to set things up, I think it belongs under the CIO, the responsibilities for artificial intelligence. Whether that's a title change or whatever, that's meaningless to me, but that responsibility should be there. So everything you need to do to implement an IT or artificial intelligence is in one house. There's a natural impetus within government that when something new comes out, let's establish a new office.
Yeah.
And that generates bureaucracy. And, I worked in Navy acquisition for a long time. And I had to move a lot of programs through the DoD process, the FAR, the DoD 5000 instruction on how you acquire something. And there's an example, and I won't get into the particulars, but we were looking at moving a particular intelligence program to a milestone C decision, which is a full rate production decision, which means we're going to start fielding this thing to the troops. We went up, we saw the person who had the milestone decision authority, and she was like, great, we should be able to get this done in about a month. Now, you probably know where I'm going with this. Then we met the rest of her staff and everybody else in OSD, and nearly a year later, we got it done.
Yeah, OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry, I should have spelled that out. These are great people, and they're doing the best they could. But the power in the Pentagon or anywhere in government is the ability to say no. Mm-hmm. And that means you have to find a way to get through that no, which means time. Mm-hmm. Which means maybe making a compromise on requirements, which might drive cost or whatever. But government needs to find a way to take away some of that power so you can move quickly, but yet still retain a balance where we're not making decisions haphazardly without thought. Mm-hmm. So I think by combining the artificial intelligence responsibility with the CIO is the right place to put it. It makes more sense. You're not necessarily expanding the bureaucracy. You're not empowering another person to say, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had Karen Evans on the show, and she had a very similar perspective way back at the beginning, about a year ago. But I was just kind of interested because I kind of see it the same way. But I think with that that exposure that I had at DHS, it seemed like you said, the mission capability of reacting fairly quick was also, I think, part of it, where like when you go to the Pentagon, there are so many different layers. It's kind of incredible.
It's over $700 billion. It's bigger than most countries. It's the largest employer in the country. Right. There's nothing on the planet like it. Yeah. I mean, the network is like 4.3 million people. Yeah. I mean, that's incomprehensible. It's a global network. It's an amazing institution. But like any institution, it could be made better. And to make some things better, it's generally not another office. It's fewer offices.
Yeah. Well, I think you and I will end on that because I think we have an agreement there. And the other agreement I think we have is that finance is where it all happens.
I agree, Troy. I give up.
There you go.
It's not IT, it's finance.
I think we could kind of go off now. But hey, by the way, next 4th of July, when you're going to have the air-conditioned fireworks display, don't forget your friends.
You're in, Troy. We will have you there. You'll love it.
I appreciate it.
I'll even buy you a wine.
Hey, I'm in. I got free water last time, so... Yeah, thank you, John. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you.
You're welcome, Troy. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.